The silence inside St. Mary's Church in Boston was heavy. It wasn't the reverent silence that precedes a solemn ceremony, but one laden with speculation, embarrassment, and malicious curiosity. Each passing second seemed to amplify the whispers echoing off the centuries-old walls, transforming what should have been the happiest day of her life into Clara Bennett's worst public nightmare. She stood motionless at the altar, her impeccable Vera Wang dress a stark contrast to the unfolding tragedy. Her hands trembled imperceptibly as she held the bouquet of white peonies, and she forced herself to keep her gaze fixed on some undefined point ahead, unable to face the 300 guests waiting in the polished mahogany pews. 45 minutes. That was how long Nathan Crawford had kept her waiting before her best man finally whispered the devastating truth in her ear. The groom wasn't coming. The humiliation burned more intensely than any physical pain. Clara could feel every gaze upon her, every whisper disguised behind gloved hands, every cell phone discreetly raised to capture her disgrace. Tomorrow, social media would be flooded with her shame. The investigative journalist who had always kept her private life in absolute secrecy would now be the headline of every gossip blog in the city. Her parents were paralyzed in the front row, her mother's face etched with tears of anger and worry. Her father, always so strong and composed, seemed to have aged 10 years in 40 minutes. The bridesmaids exchanged desperate glances, unsure whether to approach or keep their distance. Father Matthews touched her shoulder gently, but Clara barely registered the gesture. That's when she saw him. Marcus Hawthorne walked down the central corridor with the same relentless confidence he displayed in the boardrooms of his multinational company. Tall, broad shoulders perfectly complementing his tailored Italian suit, dark hair combed back revealing an aristocratic brow. He didn't hesitate, didn't slow his pace. His amber eyes remained fixed on Clara with an intensity that made something clench in his chest. Clara knew him, of course. Everyone in Boston knew Marcus Hawthorne. He had been her boss for 3 years, ever since she started working as editor-in-chief of the investigative journalism division at Hawthorne Media Group. He was demanding, brilliant, ruthless in business, and completely unapproachable on a personal level. She had never seen him at a social event, much less expected him to attend her wedding. The invitation had been a corporate formality that her assistant had insisted on sending. But there he was, moving through the stunned crowd, as if he possessed not only the church, but the moment itself. The whispers ceased abruptly, replaced by an even deeper, shock-laden silence. Marcus ascended the 3 steps to the altar with fluid elegance, and before Clara could process what was happening, he was beside her. He leaned in, his lips almost touching her ear, and his deep voice reverberated through her like distant thunder. "Pretend I'm the groom." Clara blinked, certain she had misheard. Her brain, already overwhelmed by humiliation and disbelief, refused to process the words. She turned slightly to face him, but Marcus was already positioning himself beside her, an arm around her waist with natural ease, as if that had always been his place. "Trust me," he murmured, so softly that only she could hear. "Or let everyone here leave this church with the story of how you were abandoned at the altar. The choice is yours." The pragmatic coldness in his voice jolted her back to reality. Clara looked at the congregation and saw all the faces turned toward them, gaping, confused, fascinated. She saw her mother rise slightly, her expression oscillating between horror and irrational hope. She saw the phones being raised again, now not to capture her humiliation, but to record something completely unexpected. Father Matthews was as stunned as everyone else, but Marcus turned to him with that unquestionable authority that made seasoned executives bow down. "We can begin, Father. I apologize for the delay. Last-minute business matters." The lie came out with such conviction that Clara almost believed it. She should protest. She should reject that absurd charade. But as she looked into Marcus's amber eyes, she found something there that silenced her, an intensity that went beyond a simple gesture of corporate charity. There was determination, yes, but also something darker, more complex. An emotion she couldn't name, but that made her heart race in a way completely different from the anxiety that had consumed her moments before. Clara. He said her name as if it were both a question and a statement. Say yes. And for reasons she couldn't explain, driven by an impulse that defied all logic, Clara Bennett nodded almost imperceptibly. What followed was a surreal blur. Father Matthews, still clearly confused but seemingly deciding that proceeding was less scandalous than cancelling, began the ceremony in a hesitant voice. Marcus recited the vows with a conviction that made it impossible to doubt his sincerity, his eyes never leaving hers. When her turn came, Clara heard her own voice, distant and trembling, repeating the sacred words as if in a trance. The wedding rings were a temporary problem, until Marcus produced a ring from his mother, an Art Deco piece with a modest diamond that he slipped onto his finger with surprising delicacy. She had nothing to offer in return, but he simply took the ring meant for Nathan and placed it on his own finger, as if that had always been the plan. When the priest finally pronounced the words declaring them husband and wife, the silence in the church was absolute. Marcus leaned in, and Clara felt his lips touch hers in a chaste, proper kiss, but one that somehow seemed to mark something irreversible on her soul. The applause that erupted was hesitant at first, then grew louder, driven more by disbelief and curiosity than genuine joy. Clara maintained the smile Marcus had instructed her to keep with her eyes, and together they walked down the aisle, arm in arm, while camera flashes exploded around them like fireworks. Outside the church, the June sunlight momentarily blinded her. Marcus guided her to a black limousine she didn't recognize, and only when they were safely inside the darkened vehicle did she finally hear his voice. "What did you just do?" The words came out in a harsh whisper. Marcus loosened his tie, and for the first time since he'd appeared, she saw a crack in his impenetrable armor. He ran a hand through his hair, tousling it slightly. "I saved your reputation, and possibly my sanity." He looked at her with that disconcerting intensity again. "But mostly, I prevented you from becoming a public joke." The limousine glided through the streets of Boston in a silence that seemed to amplify every chaotic thought in Clara's mind. She stared at the Art Deco ring on her finger, the metal still warm from the impossible ceremony that had just taken place. Married. She was married to Marcus Hawthorne. Not to Nathan, the man with whom she had planned to build a life, but to her billionaire boss, whom she barely knew until that morning beyond the icy professional interactions and tense meetings about editorial deadlines. "You didn't answer my question." Clara finally found the courage to break the silence, turning to face him. "Why did you do that?" Marcus kept his gaze fixed out the dark window, his jaw tense in a way she recognized from the most difficult meetings. It was his expression when he made decisions involving millions of dollars or determining the future of entire careers. But there was something different now, an almost imperceptible vulnerability in the line of his shoulders. "Nathan Crawford is an idiot," he said finally, his voice laden with a contempt that surprised Clara with its intensity. "But you already knew that, even if you didn't want to admit it." The statement hit her like a slap. Clara felt anger bubbling in her chest, an anger that needed a target, and Marcus was conveniently available. "You know nothing about Nathan or my relationship with him." The words came out sharper than she intended. "You have no right to show up and turn my life upside down just because you decided it would be fun to play the hero." Marcus finally looked at her, and the intensity in his amber eyes silenced her instantly. There was something there that she had never seen before in 3 years working under his command. Something fiery and dangerous. "Fun?" He repeated the word, as if it were poison. "Do you think I do anything for fun, Clara? Everything in my life is calculated, strategic, purposeful." He leaned slightly toward her, and she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Including this." Clara's heart raced, but she didn't know if it was from fear or something else entirely. Then explain the strategy to me. Tell me what calculation justifies marrying a woman you barely know on the day she's about to be abandoned by another man. The limousine stopped at a red light, and the reflected light painted Marcus's face in crimson hues. He studied her for a long moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. My board has been pressuring me for 2 years to get married. They say my image as a perpetual bachelor is hurting business, driving away conservative investors and clients who value family stability. He made air quotes dismissively. They wanted me to hire someone to pretend, to create a corporate charade. I refused. I thought it was pathetic. Clara processed the words, her journalistic mind connecting the dots. But she changed her mind today. Today, I saw an opportunity that would benefit us both. Marcus looked out the window again, but his right hand clenched into a fist on his knee. You avoid the public humiliation that would destroy your credibility as a journalist. Nobody takes seriously an investigative reporter who became a tabloid headline for being left at the altar. I get the wife my board wants so badly. Simple business transaction. The pragmatic coldness of the words should have relieved Clara. It should have made everything easier to process, transforming that surreal moment into just another corporate negotiation. But instead, she felt a strange pang of disappointment that made absolutely no sense. A business transaction, she repeated, her neutral tone masking a mix of emotions. How long will it last? 6 months would be enough to appease the council. A year would be ideal. Marcus finally looked at her again. Enough time for you to recover from this situation and resume your life. Then, a discreet and amicable divorce. Incompatibility or something equally vague. Clara should have been furious. She should have been demanding that he stop the limousine immediately and undo this madness. But as she looked at the ring on her finger and considered the alternative, the cruel headlines that would already be forming in newsrooms across the city, the smirk she would face in the office corridors, a part of her recognized Marcus's cold logic. And people are going to believe this, that the two of us were suddenly having a secret affair and you decided to show up at the last minute. She managed to keep her voice steady, already shifting to the professional tone she used when investigating complex stories. They'll believe what we want them to believe, Marcus replied with the confidence of someone accustomed to controlling narratives. I own half the media outlets in Boston. The other half respects or fears me enough not to contradict our version of events. And what's our version? Clara asked, even though she already suspected the answer. Office romance kept secret due to company policies. You were engaged to Crawford, but realized you were in love with me. You were going to break up with him, but he found out and ran away before you could. I, unable to let you face that humiliation, took my place. Marcus listed the points as if presenting a business strategy. It's dramatic enough to satisfy the romantics and practical enough for the skeptics. Clara should have been horrified by how easily he constructed elaborate lies, but as an investigative journalist, she recognized the solid structure of a well-told story. It was plausible. It was even convincing. And Nathan, what do you think he'll do when he finds out? Marcus's expression darkened in a way that made Clara shudder. Crawford won't do anything. Trust me. There was something about the absolute certainty in his voice that unsettled her. Marcus, what do you know about Nathan? He remained silent for so long that Clara thought he wouldn't answer. The limousine turned onto a street she didn't immediately recognize, then realized with a start that they were approaching Beacon Hill, Boston's most exclusive neighborhood. I know enough to understand that you were lucky he escaped, Marcus finally replied, his voice low and dangerous. And if you really give me a chance, I promise that in the next 6 months or a year, I'll make sure you never regret agreeing to this. The limousine pulled up in front of an impeccably restored Victorian townhouse, all red brick with white-framed windows and a gleaming black door. Clara vaguely recognized it from magazine articles about the city's most expensive properties. Marcus Hawthorne's house, valued at over $15 million. This is your new address. Marcus said, getting out of the car and extending his hand to help her up. At least for the duration of our charade. Your apartment would be far too small and would raise questions about why a billionaire's wife would be living in a studio apartment in Cambridge. Clara accepted his hand, her wedding dress looking absurdly incongruous as she climbed the marble steps. A doorman she hadn't seen appear opened the door, greeting Marcus with a respectful nod. The interior was exactly as she had imagined, elegant and minimalist, with modern designer furniture that probably cost more than her car. Everything was in neutral shades of gray, white, and black, with occasional touches of dark wood. Contemporary art covered the walls, pieces she vaguely recognized from exclusive auctions. There are 4 suites on the second floor, Marcus explained as he guided her through the entrance hall. You can choose anyone except the master suite on the 3rd floor. That's mine. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, will arrive in an hour to assist you with anything you need. Your belongings from the apartment will be transferred tomorrow. The efficiency with which he organized his life was both impressive and terrifying. Clara felt control slipping even further from her fingers. And what about my parents, my friends, the people who were in that church and deserve a real explanation? She managed to ask, even as emotional exhaustion began to weigh on her like a wet blanket. Marcus stopped in the middle of the elegant staircase, turning to face her. The light from the crystal chandelier above them cast interesting shadows on her face, softening the harsh lines of her jaw. Let me handle the explanations. You've been through enough trauma for today. His hand reached for her face almost involuntarily, his fingers brushing her cheek with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with his ruthless corporate persona. Rest, Clara. Tomorrow we'll begin building our story. And as she climbed the stairs toward a luxurious guest room in a house that was now supposedly hers, wearing a wedding dress meant for another man and wearing a ring belonging to a woman she had never met, Clara Bennett realized that her life had completely changed in a matter of hours. What she couldn't decide was whether Marcus Hawthorne had saved her or trapped her in a lie more elaborate than any story she had ever investigated. Morning arrived with a particular cruelty, filtering through the linen curtains that Clara didn't remember closing. For a blessed moment, she forgot where she was. Then reality crashed down on her with the weight of an entire building. Her wedding dress thrown over a Louis XV armchair, the Art Deco ring still on her finger, and the impossible fact that she was married to Marcus Hawthorne. Clara sat up in the king-size bed, her hands trembling as she reached for her phone on the nightstand. 53 unread messages, 17 missed calls. She swiped the screen with reluctant fingers, her stomach churning with each notification. Her best friend, Diana, had sent a frantic series of messages that escalated from concern to utter disbelief. Her parents had called 6 times. Nathan hadn't sent anything. This silence somehow hurt more than any pathetic explanation he could have offered. But it was the social media notifications that really paralyzed her. Hawthorne wedding was trending on Twitter. Grainy photos of her and Marcus leaving the church were already circulating on gossip websites. Billionaire rescues abandoned publisher in dramatic wedding, screamed one headline. Secret office romance explodes in surprise ceremony, proclaimed another. The bedroom door opened with a soft knock, revealing a middle-aged Asian woman with her hair styled in a neat bun and a warm smile that seemed genuine. Good morning, Mrs. Hawthorne. I'm Chen Li, Mr. Marcus's housekeeper. The woman entered carrying a tray with coffee and croissants. You asked me not to wake you, but since it's already 10 in the morning, I thought you might need something. Mrs. Hawthorne. The words sounded completely foreign to Clara's ears, as if Chen were speaking to someone else. Please call me Clara. She tried to smile, but the gesture seemed artificial on her face. And thank you. I'm not sure what the rules are here. Chen carefully placed the tray on the bed with maternal care. There aren't many rules, dear. Mr. Marcus values privacy and efficiency. He's already left for the office, but he's left this to you. She extended a heavy, cream-colored paper envelope. Clara opened it with clumsy fingers, immediately recognizing Marcus's masculine, angular handwriting. Clara, take the day to adjust. My lawyer, Richard Cho, will visit you at 2 p.m. to discuss the legal aspects of our arrangement. Wear something comfortable. We need to have dinner together at 7 p.m. to discuss our public strategy. M. There was no darling, no pretense of affection. It was straight to the point, exactly how Marcus conducted all his professional interactions. Clara didn't know whether to feel relieved or vaguely insulted by the lack of any emotion. Has he always been like this? Clara asked before she could censor herself. So, controlling? Chen smiled with the kind of insight that comes only from years of observing someone. Mr. Marcus learned early on that the world doesn't offer kindness to those who show weakness. But that doesn't mean he doesn't feel things deeply. It just means he chose to build walls that were too high. Clara observed the room as she bathed in the adjacent marble suite, changing out of her wedding dress into jeans and a silk blouse that Chen had miraculously provided in her exact size. While drying her hair, she allowed herself to examine the room with a more critical eye. It wasn't as impersonal as the rest of the house. There were subtle touches of personality. A black and white photograph of Paris on the wall, books on the shelf that included poetry as well as business treatises, a fern plant near the window that someone clearly tended to carefully. It was as if this particular room had been prepared not just for a temporary guest, but for someone whose tastes Marcus had quietly observed and memorized. The thought worried her more than it should have. Richard Cho arrived precisely at 2 o'clock. A Korean-American man in his 40s with designer glasses and a leather briefcase that probably cost more than Clara's monthly rent. He settled into the living room with the efficiency of someone accustomed to handling delicate situations. Mrs. Bennet. Pardon me, Mrs. Hawthorne, he began, opening the folder. I am here to ensure that you fully understand the nature of your agreement with Mr. Hawthorne. Clara sat in the opposite armchair, her back straight, feeling strangely as if she were being interviewed for a job she had already accepted without reading the description. Is it a retroactive prenuptial agreement? She asked, her journalistic mind focusing on the practical details. Essentially, yes, although technically yesterday's ceremony is legally binding. He hesitated, looking uncomfortable for the first time. Mr. Hawthorne obtained an emergency marriage license through specific connections. Therefore, in the eyes of the law, you are married. The ground seemed to tilt beneath Clara's feet. It was one thing to participate in a public charade. It was quite another to discover that she was legally married. He didn't mention that detail, she said, her voice icy. I believe Mr. Hawthorne intended to inform you personally, but wanted to ensure you had independent legal representation when reviewing the terms. Cho shoved a thick document toward her. This agreement guarantees that you will retain all assets you bring into the marriage. Furthermore, for each month the marriage lasts, you will receive $50,000 as inconvenience compensation. In the event of divorce after 6 months, that amount will be $300,000. 1 year would result in $600,000. Clara felt nausea rise in her throat. He's paying me to pretend to be his wife. He's making sure you don't suffer financially for helping him solve a corporate problem, Cho corrected gently. And Ms. Hawthorne, may I speak frankly? She nodded, unable to find the words. I've worked for Marcus Hawthorne for 8 years. I've seen him negotiate billion-dollar mergers without batting an eye. But when he called me last night to prepare these documents, there was something in his voice I'd never heard before. Cho closed the folder, studying it with discerning eyes. Whatever motivated him to do what he did in that church, it wasn't purely transactional. Before Clara could process that disturbing revelation, her cell phone vibrated. Diana. She could no longer postpone that conversation. I need to attend to this, she murmured to Cho, who nodded and discreetly left the room. You have 30 seconds to explain to me what the hell happened yesterday before I come over there and demand answers in person. Diana dismissed any greeting, her voice wavering between concern and fascination. Clara stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of Boston. It's complicated. Forgetting a birthday is complicated. Arguing about where to spend Christmas is complicated. Marrying your billionaire boss on the day Nathan dumped you goes beyond complicated and enters telenovela territory. Diana took a deep breath. Clara, I love you, but I need to know. Were you having an affair with Marcus Hawthorne? The lie Marcus had so carefully constructed hung on his lips. It would be easy to confirm it, solidify the narrative, make everything seem like a natural progression of events. But as she looked at her reflection in the glass, wearing expensive clothes in a house that wasn't hers, wearing a ring that represented a lie, Clara discovered she couldn't fool her best friend. No, she admitted softly. Not until yesterday. Diana, he saved me from the worst humiliation of my life, and now I'm trapped in something I don't fully understand. The silence on the other end of the line stretched on for so long that Clara thought the call had dropped. Then Diana sighed, and it was that specific sigh she used when Clara made questionable decisions, like accepting that dangerous story about police corruption or confronting a corrupt politician without proper backup. Do you need me there? The mere offer nearly shattered Clara's carefully composed demeanor. I need to figure things out first, but thank you. After she hung up, Clara found Chen in the gourmet kitchen, preparing something that smelled of ginger and garlic. Mrs. Chen, may I ask you something? Clara leaned against the Carrara marble counter. Have you ever seen Marcus with anyone? Romantically. Chen stopped chopping vegetables, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. In 5 years working here, I've seen Mr. Marcus leave with maybe 3 women. He never brought any of them home. He never mentioned anyone by name. She looked at Clara with kind but penetrating eyes. Until you. Did he mention my name? Frequently. Clara finished that investigation. Clara won another award. Clara is the best editor we've ever had. Chen resumed preparing the food. A man who never talks about his personal life but constantly mentions a female colleague. Well, that says something. Clara was processing this information when the front door opened. She checked the clock, confused. It was only 4 in the afternoon, far too early for Marcus to be back from the office. But it was his firm footsteps that echoed down the marble hallway, and then he was there, standing in the doorway to the kitchen, his suit slightly wrinkled, and an expression she couldn't decipher. We need to talk, he said without preamble. Now. Something in his tone made Clara's stomach clench. What happened? Marcus pulled out his cell phone and opened a news page, turning the screen toward him. The headline hit him like a punch. New Lady Hawthorne's ex-fiancé alleges kidnapping and coercion in exclusive interview. And there was Nathan, with his perfectly calibrated abandoned puppy expression, telling an eager reporter how Clara and Marcus had conspired to ruin him, how he had been threatened and forced to leave the church, how it was all an elaborate corporate fraud. He's lying, Clara whispered, even as part of her recognized the irony of defending a truth that was itself built on lies. I know. Marcus put the phone away, his jaw tense. But now we have a much bigger problem than managing public perception. He looked at her with that intensity that made her heart race uncomfortably. Now we need to prove that our marriage is real. Nathan Crawford's accusation exploded across the internet like wildfire, consuming every digital space where Clara or Marcus's name appeared. Within hours, what should have been an elegant solution to a public disaster had turned into an even bigger scandal, with conspiracy theories sprouting in forums and venomous comments flooding social media. Clara sat in Marcus's living room, watching him pace back and forth like a caged predator. He had loosened his tie and unbuttoned his shirt collar, signs of stress she never imagined she'd see in him. Marcus Hawthorne had always been ruthless, controlled, but now there were visible cracks in his corporate armor. He's playing dirty, Marcus finally said, stopping in front of the windows overlooking the private garden at the back of the property. The golden late afternoon light highlighted the tension in his shoulders. Nathan knows exactly what he's doing. If we don't respond appropriately, it could destroy not only my reputation, but the entire Hawthorne Media News Division. No one will trust a news department run by the CEO's wife, especially if there are doubts about the legitimacy of the marriage. The reality of those words hit Clara with full force. She hadn't considered how this would affect her career, the work she had spent years building. Every investigation she had conducted, every award she had won, every source she had carefully cultivated, all of it could be tarnished by this impossible situation. "So what do we do?" Clara asked, her voice firmer than she felt. "We can't just issue a statement denying everything. That will only fuel more speculation." Marcus turned to face her, and there was something different in his gaze now. It wasn't the calculated intensity she knew from the boardrooms, but something more visceral, almost vulnerable. "We do what real couples would do. We live our lives publicly. We let people see us together. We build a narrative that's impossible to refute." He crossed the room in slow, deliberate steps, stopping just inches from her. "But that means you'll have to trust me, Clara. Completely." His proximity made the air seem thicker. Clara could feel the heat radiating from his body. The subtle scent of his cologne mingled with something purely masculine. It was unsettling how much his presence affected her senses, especially considering that 24 hours ago she was about to marry another man. "Trust you?" She repeated the words, forcing herself to maintain eye contact. "Marcus, I barely know you outside the office. I know nothing about your personal life, your tastes, your stories. How are we going to convince the world that we're a real couple when we're essentially strangers?" Something flickered in his eyes, an emotion that passed too quickly for her to identify. "Then we need to remedy this. Quickly." He extended his hand, and Clara looked at it for a long moment before accepting it, allowing him to gently pull her to her feet. "I canceled the dinner I had planned. Instead, we'll have dinner here. Just the two of us. No lawyers, no corporate strategies, just two people getting to know each other." The proposal should have sounded simple, even pleasant. But there was an underlying intensity in his words that made Clara's heart race uncomfortably. She nodded, unable to articulate a verbal response. Chen prepared a dinner that could rival any five-star restaurant, but insisted on serving it in the smaller dining room on the second floor, a more intimate space with a table that only accommodated 4 people. Candles were lit, not out of romance. Clara tried to convince herself, but simply because the soft lighting was more comfortable. Marcus appeared 20 minutes later, having changed out of his suit into dark jeans and a gray linen shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. It was the first time Clara had seen him dressed casually, and the transformation was disconcerting. He looked younger, more approachable, but somehow even more dangerously attractive. "Wine?" he offered, holding up a bottle that Clara recognized as a very expensive Bordeaux. "Please." She needed something to calm her nerves, which were inexplicably on edge. They began with superficial and safe conversations, exchanging basic information that real couples would know about each other. Marcus was born in Connecticut, the only child of parents who died in a car accident when he was 22. He inherited the family media company and transformed it from a regional operation into a national conglomerate in less than a decade. Clara shared her own story, growing up in a middle-class family in Providence, Rhode Island, the daughter of a history professor and a nurse. She had always known she wanted to be a journalist, inspired by stories of investigative reporters who exposed injustices and changed public policy. But as dinner progressed and the wine went down in the bottle, the conversations deepened, slipping into more personal territory. "Why investigative journalism?" Marcus asked, leaning slightly toward her. "It's dangerous, often thankless. You've been threatened 3 times as far as I know, sued twice for defamation, although both cases were dismissed. Why choose this?" Clara swirled the wine in her glass, considering the question with more seriousness than he probably expected. Because someone needs to do it. Because there are people in power who count on the fact that others will be too intimidated or distracted to question their actions. She looked directly at him. And because I believe that the truth matters, even when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable. The irony of his words did not go unnoticed by either of them, considering the elaborate lie they were constructing. Marcus smiled, but there was sadness in the curve of his lips. Truth is a complicated commodity, Clara. Sometimes the right lie protects more people than the wrong truth could help. He paused, his fingers tracing the stem of his wine glass. My father used to say that. I hated him for that philosophy. I thought it was cowardice disguised as pragmatism. And now? Now I understand that he was trying to prepare me for a world where pure idealism is a luxury that leaders cannot afford. Marcus stood up, walking to the window that offered a view of the garden now bathed in the soft light of twilight. But that doesn't mean I've stopped wishing things were different. Clara joined him at the window, maintaining a respectable distance but aware of every inch between them. Is this why you did what you did yesterday? In church? Because you believed it was the right lie to protect more people? He didn't answer immediately, and the silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. Finally, Marcus turned to face her, and the vulnerability in his eyes was so raw that Clara almost recoiled. I did what I did because I couldn't bear the thought of you facing that humiliation alone. The words came out low, almost reluctantly. And because for 3 years, since the day you walked into my office for that first job interview, I've been fighting something I shouldn't feel for a subordinate. Clara's heart stopped, then raced erratically. Marcus, you don't need to say anything. He raised a hand, cutting off any response she might offer. I would never have acted on that. I would never have compromised your career or put you in an uncomfortable position. But when I saw you standing at that altar, I saw an opportunity to get what I wanted while offering you a way out. Selfish? Absolutely. But I don't regret it. Clara should be furious. She should feel manipulated, used. But as she processed her words, she remembered small moments over the years that hadn't registered as significant at the time. Marcus always defending her most controversial investigations before the board, even when they threatened legal action. Him personally ensuring she received the necessary resources for each matter. The way his eyes followed her in meetings, a look she had attributed to professional scrutiny, but now recognized as something entirely different. And Nathan, she managed to ask, her voice barely more than a whisper. You said you knew things about him. Marcus's expression hardened immediately. Nathan Crawford has been having an affair with his maid of honor, Monica, for 8 months. They planned to elope after the wedding, once he had joint access to their bank accounts and the trust fund their grandparents left them. I found out 3 weeks ago. The revelation should have devastated Clara, but all she felt was a distant numbness. And you didn't tell me. I tried to find the right way to tell you without sounding like a jealous boss interfering in your personal life. I hired private investigators to be sure before making accusations. I received the final report on the morning of the wedding. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, frustrating the dark strands. I was driving to the church planning to intercept you before the ceremony when I received a message from my assistant saying the groom hadn't shown up. Then I realized Nathan had found out I knew, and he ran away. Clara stepped away, needing space to process everything. Monica, her best friend from college, one of the bridesmaids. The betrayal cut deeper than she expected, and yet, somehow, it wasn't the most shocking part of the conversation. You kept this information for 3 weeks, she said slowly, turning to face him again. You hired investigators. You watched me prepare for a wedding that you knew was a sham. Yes. Marcus offered no apologies, no attempt to soften the truth. And I would do it again, because it meant I would be there when you needed me. instead of leaving you to figure it out on your own. The logic was warped, possessive, but there was a sincerity in his words that Clara couldn't deny. And a part of her, a part she didn't want to examine too closely, felt strangely touched by his fierce, even if misguided, protectiveness. "That doesn't make what we're doing right," she said finally, though the conviction in her voice was weak. "No," Marcus agreed, closing the distance between them again. "But it makes it more real than you imagine, at least from my point of view." They stood there, inches apart, the tension between them almost palpable. Clara knew she should pull back, set boundaries, remind herself that this was a temporary arrangement built on mutual need and not on any real basis. But as she looked into Marcus's amber eyes, she saw something that made her hesitate. There was desire there, yes, but also something deeper and more frightening, a connection she wasn't prepared to name. The ringing of her cell phone broke the moment, and Clara practically jumped away from him, grateful for the interruption. It was Diana again, and this time Clara decided she needed to answer. She gestured vaguely toward the phone, and Marcus nodded, his expression reverting to that mask of neutral control. "Of course. I'll give Chen instructions on the preparations for tomorrow. We'll have to make some public appearances, starting with breakfast at the Capitol Grill at 9. The media will be notified." And just as the vulnerability had appeared, it disappeared, and Marcus Hawthorne reverted to being the ruthless CEO who orchestrated lives like pieces on a chessboard. Clara answered the call, but her eyes followed Marcus as he left the room, leaving her wondering which version of him was real and which was the carefully constructed performance. Breakfast at the Capitol Grill was orchestrated with the precision of a military operation. Clara arrived with Marcus in her private limousine, aware of the cameras already waiting outside the exclusive restaurant. She wore a Chanel ensemble that Chen had miraculously produced, navy blue with gold details that made her look exactly what she should, the elegant wife of a billionaire. Marcus held her hand as they exited the car, his fingers intertwining with hers with practiced familiarity. To any casual observer, they were the perfect couple, walking in perfect sync, smiling for the cameras with that natural confidence that only people accustomed to public scrutiny possess. But Clara could feel the tension in his fingers, the way his thumb traced nervous circles on his palm. An unconscious gesture that revealed that even Marcus Hawthorne wasn't entirely immune to pressure. Inside the restaurant, the management led them to a strategically positioned table, visible enough to be noticed, but private enough for intimate conversations. It was a carefully prepared stage, and Clara recognized the charade because she herself had exposed similar tactics in her reporting on business people manipulating public perception. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked as soon as they sat down, his voice low but genuinely concerned. His eyes studied her with an intensity she was beginning to recognize as concern disguised as analysis. "I'm playing my part," Clara replied, maintaining a fixed smile as a waiter brought sparkling water and elegant menus. "Isn't that what we're doing? Acting?" Something flickered in Marcus's eyes, an emotion that could have been hurt if she didn't know better. "About last night. What I said." "It was convenient," Clara interrupted, her voice sharper than she intended. She had spent the entire night analyzing that conversation, dissecting every word Marcus had uttered about suppressed feelings and misguided protection. Part of her wanted to believe in his sincerity, but the skeptical journalist inside her questioned every motivation. "You needed to create a more compelling emotional narrative for our charade. I understand." Marcus put the menu aside, completely ignoring the waiter who was waiting to take their order. His hand reached for hers on the table, not for public display, but with a genuine urgency that made Clara hesitate. "Clara, look at me." When she finally looked up, the vulnerability she saw in his face completely disarmed her. "I can be many things, manipulative, calculating, even ruthless when necessary. But I've never lied to you about how I feel. And if you truly believe that 3 years of—" He was interrupted by the arrival of 2 women whom Clara immediately recognized from the society pages, Millicent van der Berg and her daughter Victoria, fifth-generation socialites who considered Boston their personal property. They approached the table with smiles that didn't reach their eyes, predators detecting blood in the water. "Marcus, darling," Millicent cooed, completely ignoring Clara. "What a delightful surprise. Victoria and I were just discussing your sudden marriage, so—" Unexpected. Marcus stood up politely, but Clara noticed how tense his shoulders became. "Millicent, Victoria. Allow me to introduce my wife, Clara." The emphasis on the word wife was deliberate, almost possessive. Victoria examined Clara with critical eyes that clearly found her inferior. "Yes, we saw the photos. Very dramatic. That whole situation with your previous fiancé must have been embarrassing." Her smile was venomous, although I suppose it worked in your favor in the end. Clara felt anger boiling in her veins, but years of interviewing hostile people had taught her to maintain her composure. She stood gracefully, extending her hand with professional confidence. "Victoria, what a pleasure to finally meet you in person. I read that fascinating article about your charitable foundation. Although it's curious how only 8% of the donations actually reach the beneficiaries, while 70% go to administrative costs. I'm sure there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for that." Victoria's face paled, and Millicent gasped audibly. Marcus, Clara noted with satisfaction, was struggling to suppress a smile. It was information she had uncovered months ago while investigating fraudulent charities, but had never published because the larger story about government corruption had taken precedence. "How dare you?" Victoria began, but Marcus gently interrupted, his hand finding Clara's waist in a protective gesture that sent warmth through her. "My wife is an investigative journalist, as I'm sure you all know, a 2-time Pulitzer Prize winner for exposing financial fraud." There was genuine pride in his voice that made Clara's heart clench. "So perhaps it's best not to provoke her unless you want to become her next story." The van der Berg women retreated with minimal courtesies, and Clara sat down again, her heart racing with adrenaline. When she looked at Marcus, he was smiling. A genuine smile, and not the calculated one he wore in corporate meetings. "That was spectacular," he said softly, leaning toward her. "It reminded me exactly why you're the best at what you do." "I shouldn't have said that," Clara admitted, though she didn't regret it in the slightest. "It was impulsive, and will probably create more problems." "It was perfect. It showed them, and anyone watching, that you're not a passive opportunist, but a formidable woman who just happened to marry me." Marcus took her hand again, and this time, Clara didn't pull away. "And honestly, it was incredibly attractive to see you take them apart like that." The compliment made Clara blush in a way that irritated her practical nature. She shouldn't care what Marcus found attractive. This was a business arrangement, regardless of what he claimed to feel for her. They finally placed their orders, and the conversation drifted into safer territory. Work, curiously, became her refuge. Marcus inquired about the police corruption investigation she had been pursuing for months, and Clara found herself excitedly explaining the complex details of the case, the connections she was tracing between corrupt officials and real estate developers. "That's why you were working late last Tuesday," Marcus commented, and Clara blinked in surprise. "How do you know I was working late?" He hesitated, a guilty expression briefly crossing his face. I may have checked the building's security logs, frequently, to ensure your safety while working late hours." Clara should have been disturbed by that confession, by the surveillance implied in it, but instead, she found herself strangely touched. "Marcus, this is invasive, overprotective, possibly creepy?" He smiled humorlessly. "Yes, I'm aware. But after you received that death threat last year during the human trafficking investigation, I couldn't sleep without knowing you were safe." The memory of those terrifying weeks came rushing back. Clara had received graphic messages detailing exactly what they would do to her if she continued investigating. She reported it to the police, but refused protection because she didn't want to be intimidated into silence. She never knew Marcus was secretly monitoring her security. "You increased the building's security back then," she said slowly, connecting the dots she hadn't noticed before. "You said it was a routine upgrade, but it was because of me." "It was to protect all the employees," Marcus corrected, but his expression confirmed the truth. "But yes, especially you. And before you say it was inappropriate, I don't care. I'd do it again without hesitation." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the food, and they ate in a silence that was less comfortable than tense with unspoken things. Clara processed revelation after revelation about the man she had married, each painting a more complex picture than she had expected. They were finishing their coffee when Marcus's cell phone vibrated. He checked the screen, and his expression immediately darkened, his jaw clenching in a way that Clara now recognized as suppressed anger. "What happened?" she asked, concern rising instantly. "Nathan gave another interview, this time to the Boston Herald." Marcus turned the phone so she could see the headline. "Ex-fiancé alleges publisher and CEO conspired to steal family inheritance." Clara felt her blood run cold. What inheritance? "My grandmother left a modest trust fund, but Nathan never had legal access to it. Apparently, he's claiming that you had a prenuptial agreement that would give him rights to any assets brought into the marriage, and that our sudden marriage was specifically designed to invalidate that agreement and protect his money." Marcus put the phone away, his expression becoming that mask of icy control. "It's completely false, of course, but it's the kind of claim that gains traction because it appeals to the narrative that billionaires manipulate the system." "We need to sue for defamation," Clara said immediately, her journalistic mind analyzing angles. "The allegations are demonstrably false. There was no prenuptial agreement, and he had no legal rights to my assets. Prosecuting would only prolong the story, keep it in the headlines for months." Marcus gestured to the waiter to bring the bill, his urgency palpable. "No, we need a different answer, a more definitive one." They left the restaurant under the weight of curious glances and camera flashes, and Clara maintained her practiced smile, even as her mind raced with possibilities. Back in the safety of the limousine, Marcus immediately picked up his phone and made a call. "Richard, I need all the files we've compiled on Nathan Crawford. Everything. And I want a public relations team assembled within an hour." He paused, listening. "No, we're not just going to defend. We're going to counterattack." Clara watched him transform back into the ruthless CEO, orchestrating moves with military efficiency. It was impressive and slightly intimidating, reminding her of the power Marcus casually wielded. But it also revealed just how much he was willing to do to protect her, even if it meant public war with Nathan. "Marcus," she said softly as he hung up. "Thank you for all of this. I know it's not what you planned when you offered to help at the church." He looked at her with that intensity that never failed to make her pulse race. "Clara, don't you understand? I would do anything for you. This marriage may have started as a convenient solution to both our problems, but for me, it was always more than that." The words hung between them, laden with meaning that Clara wasn't ready to confront. She was spared from answering for arriving at the townhouse, but as she climbed the familiar steps, she felt the weight of the truth settling upon her. Somewhere between the public charade and the private moments, the line between acting and reality was beginning to blur dangerously. Night fell over Boston like a heavy cloak, and Clara found herself alone in Marcus's home office, surrounded by documents and evidence that her public relations team had compiled on Nathan. Each page revealed layers of betrayal she hadn't noticed: suspicious financial transactions, messages exchanged with Monica planning the scam, even emails to lawyers investigating her true financial worth. Her hand trembled slightly as she held a printout of messages between Nathan and Monica, dated 6 months before the wedding. They laughed at her, called her naive, discussed exactly how to manipulate her to gain maximum access to her resources before disappearing together. The humiliation burned more deeply now than in that church, because it wasn't just about being abandoned. It was about having been completely deceived for months. "You should be resting." Marcus's voice made her jump, and she turned to find him standing in the doorway, still wearing his work shirt, but with his tie removed and the first few buttons undone. He was carrying 2 cups of tea, the steam rising in lazy spirals. "Chen insisted I bring this. Said you didn't eat anything at dinner." Clara accepted the cup gratefully, wrapping her hands around the comforting warmth. "I can't stop reading. It's like watching a car accident in slow motion, knowing you're inside the vehicle but unable to change the outcome." Marcus sat down in the chair next to her, his eyes scanning the documents scattered across the table. "I wanted to spare you this. I just wanted to make it all disappear without you having to face the sordid details. But I need to face it," Clara replied, her voice firmer than she felt. "I've spent years investigating fraud, exposing other people's lies. How could I not have seen this in my own life? How could I have been so blind? Because you trusted him, because love, or what you thought was love, made you vulnerable." Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. "And because Nathan is a gifted sociopath who has spent years perfecting his mask. You didn't fail, Clara. He deceived you systematically and deliberately." The words should have brought comfort, but they only intensified the feeling of violation. Clara set the cup aside and buried her face in her hands, her shoulders trembling with suppressed emotion. She felt Marcus's arm around her before processing that he had moved, gently pulling her against his chest in a hug that asked for nothing, only offered comfort. "I'm sorry," she murmured against her shirt, aware that she was probably wrinkling the expensive fabric. "I don't cry, I never cry. It's a rule I've had since journalism school." "Stupid rules can be broken," Marcus said softly, his hand tracing comforting circles on her back. "Especially when you've just discovered that the man you planned to spend your life with was using you as part of a financial fraud scheme." The pragmatic absurdity of the statement elicited a strangled laugh from Clara, and somehow it broke the dam. She cried for her naivete, for the betrayed trust, for the months of wedding planning that were all based on lies. But she also cried with relief, because Marcus had saved her from that fate, even if his motivations were complicated. When she finally calmed down, aware that she had left a damp stain on his shirt, Clara stepped back slightly. Marcus kept his arms around her but loosened his grip, giving her room to breathe while his eyes studied her with intense concern. "Better?" he asked, and she nodded, exhausted but strangely lighter. "Thank you for not telling me I was being dramatic or that I should get over it. Clara, you have every right to pursue this however you need." Marcus reached for a handkerchief in his drawer, offering it to her. "But I also need you to know that Nathan won't get away with it. The evidence we've compiled not only refutes his public claims, but also proves premeditated fraud. My lawyers are preparing a criminal case." Clara wiped her face, her journalistic mind taking over again. "Criminal? That's aggressive. Are you sure the evidence is solid enough?" "Absolutely. He committed wire fraud, conspired to commit theft through false representation, and based on these messages," Marcus touched the printouts, "there is clear evidence of premeditation and intent. Any decent prosecutor would take this case. The prospect of Nathan facing real consequences should have brought satisfaction, but Clara only felt empty. And Monica. She was my friend, or at least I thought she was. She was complicit in every aspect. She will also be prosecuted." Marcus paused, his expression softening slightly. "But if you want me to back down, to find a less nuclear solution, I would. This is your decision, not mine." Clara considered her options, thinking not only of revenge, but of protection. How many other women could Nathan deceive if he weren't arrested now? How many people could Monica manipulate? The investigative journalist within her knew the answer. "Proceed with the process," she said firmly, "but I want to be involved every step of the way. Not just as a victim, but as someone who understands how to build a solid case." Pride flashed in Marcus's eyes, that expression that made Clara's heart race uncomfortably. "I wouldn't expect less from you." He stood up, extending his hand. "But now, you need to sleep. Tomorrow we'll have a press conference where we'll present our official response. You'll need to be rested." Clara accepted his hand, allowing him to pull her to her feet. The sudden closeness made the air between them shift, filled with that tension that always seemed to emerge when they let their guard down. Marcus's eyes scanned her face with an intensity that made Clara forget to breathe. "Clara," he said softly, his hand still holding hers. "I know you have reasons to question my motives, to wonder if all this is elaborate manipulation. But I need you to believe one thing. I never lied about how I feel about you. Every word I said was true." She should have stepped back, set professional boundaries, reminded herself that this was a temporary arrangement. But as she looked into his amber eyes, she saw genuine vulnerability that defied her trained skepticism. Her free hand reached for his face almost involuntarily, fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. "What if this is just stress and forced closeness?" Clara whispered, her voice trembling. "What if, when all this is over, we discover there was nothing real between us?" Marcus covered her hand with his, turning his face to press a kiss to her palm. "Then at least we will have tried." "But Clara, what I feel is not new. It's not a product of dramatic circumstances. It's something I've been suppressing for 3 years, and now that I'm allowed to feel it, I can no longer pretend." The kiss happened naturally, inevitably, as if they had been moving toward that moment since the church. It was different from the chaste kiss during the ceremony. This one was full of promise and questioning, asking permission while offering comfort. Clara responded without thinking, her fingers sliding into his hair as she deepened the contact. When they finally separated, both breathing heavily, Clara felt the world reorient itself. This wasn't a performance for cameras or a staged act for curious audiences. It was real and terrifying and utterly complicated. "This changes everything," she said. Still so close she could feel his breath against her lips. "Either you clear everything up," Marcus countered, his forehead resting against hers. "Maybe we've been pretending the opposite of what we needed to. Pretending this was just business when it was always personal." Clara knew she should protest, insist on time to process, establish clear boundaries. But as Marcus guided her out of the office and up the stairs with her, their hands never losing contact, she discovered she didn't want to rationalize or analyze. For once in her carefully controlled life, Clara just wanted to feel. At her bedroom door, Marcus paused, giving her one last chance to back away. "Sleep well, Clara. Tomorrow we'll begin rebuilding your reputation and destroying his. But tonight, just rest knowing you're safe here." He kissed her gently on the forehead, a gesture almost paternal in its tenderness, and then turned toward the stairs leading to his master suite. Clara watched him go, touching her lips still tingling from the previous kiss, and recognized the truth she had been avoiding. Somewhere between the public charade and the stolen moments of vulnerability, she was falling in love with Marcus Hawthorne. And that was infinitely more terrifying than any headline or public scandal could be. Morning came too quickly, and Clara found herself in the guest room that was beginning to feel like her own, gazing at the Armani suit Chen had prepared for the press conference. Dark navy blue, impeccably tailored, designed to convey authority and competence, the armor of a woman who would not be defined by another person's betrayal. But as she dressed, all she could think about was the kiss from the night before, the way Marcus held her as if she were precious and fragile, yet also strong enough to withstand storms. The contradiction defined him, and it was beginning to define them as well. Her phone vibrated with a message from Diana. "I saw the news about the lawsuit against Nathan. Are you okay? Do you need me to come over and kick someone's ass?" Clara smiled despite the tension, typing a quick reply. "I'm handling it, but you can save that offer for later." She paused, then added, "Things with Marcus are complicated, more complicated than I planned." Diana's response was immediate. Complicated in a good way or complicated in a bad way? Clara looked at the Art Deco ring on her finger, thinking about how to respond. Finally, she typed, "I haven't figured it out yet, but I think I'm willing to risk finding out." When she came downstairs, Marcus was already waiting in the entrance hall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit that accentuated his broad shoulders. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, and the expression on his face when he saw her made Clara's heart leap, a pure, unfiltered desire that he made no attempt to hide. "You look stunning," he said simply, closing the distance between them. His hands found her waist naturally, as if they had already mapped every curve. "Ready to face the wolves?" Clara nodded, allowing herself to lean on him for just a moment, absorbing his strength. "As long as you're by my side." "Always," Marcus promised, and sealed the vow with a kiss that left her both dizzy and courageous. Then, hand in hand, they went out to face the world that watched, judged, and speculated about them. But this time, Clara wasn't acting. She was choosing to believe that sometimes the best stories begin with improbable endings and unexpectedly open hearts. And as the limousine glided through the streets of Boston toward an uncertain future, Clara realized that for the first time since Nathan had abandoned her in that church, she wasn't just surviving the storm. She was learning to dance in the rain with a man who challenged her, protected her, and saw beyond the facade she presented to the world. Whether this was real or another elaborate illusion, only time would tell. But for now, it was enough. The Hawthorne Media Group conference room was packed with journalists, cameras, and microphones arranged like a battalion ready to attack. Clara felt the weight of each gaze as she walked through the door beside Marcus, their hands intertwined in a gesture no longer just for the cameras. The pressure of their fingers was real, comforting, an anchor amidst the controlled chaos that was about to collapse. Richard Cho stood at the podium, a stack of documents meticulously organized. Beside him, a large screen displayed the company logo, but Clara knew that she would soon reveal evidence that would shatter Nathan's carefully constructed narrative. She and Marcus took their places, and the murmur in the room instantly increased, reporters shouting questions even before the press conference officially began. Marcus raised a hand, and surprisingly, silence fell over the room like a heavy curtain. That was the authority he commanded naturally, the presence that made entire meeting rooms stop to listen. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice firm and clear. "Over the past 48 hours, serious allegations have been made against me and my wife. Allegations that are not only false, but criminally defamatory. We are here today not to defend our marriage, which is real and legally valid, but to present evidence of premeditated fraud committed by Nathan Crawford." The room erupted in simultaneous questions, but Marcus remained impassive. Richard activated the screen, and the first image appeared, a screenshot of messages between Nathan and Monica. Clara forced herself to maintain her composure as her betrayal was publicly exposed. Each cruel word magnified for hundreds of eyes to see. "As you can see," Richard began, his voice professional and detached, "these messages, authenticated by digital forensic experts, demonstrate a clear conspiracy to commit fraud. Mr. Crawford planned to marry Mrs. Hawthorne specifically to gain access to her financial resources, including a trust fund of approximately $2 million left by his late grandmother." Clara watched the expressions around the room shift, skepticism turning to shock as more evidence was presented. Bank statements showing that Nathan had accumulated gambling debts of over $300,000. Emails to lawyers investigating exactly how much Clara was worth. Even audio recordings, legally obtained through private investigators, where Nathan and Monica laughed while planning their scheme. "Mrs. Reynolds was a victim," Marcus continued, deliberately using her maiden name to establish her independent identity. "She wasn't involved in any conspiracy. Our marriage, though sudden, was a consensual decision between two adults who recognized a genuine connection under extraordinary circumstances." A reporter in the front row raised her hand, and Marcus nodded for her to speak. It was Jennifer Walsh of the Boston Globe, known for not accepting superficial answers. Mr. Hawthorne, Mrs. Hawthorne, how do you expect us to believe that you have developed a romantic connection strong enough to marry immediately, when records show minimal interaction outside of a professional setting? Clara felt Marcus tense beside her, but she placed a hand on his arm, signaling that she would respond. Leaning toward the microphone, she met Jennifer's eyes with the confidence she had developed over years of confronting hostile sources. "You're right that our public interactions were limited," Clara began, her voice firm. "But that doesn't mean the connection didn't exist. I worked directly for Mr. Hawthorne for 3 years. I saw how he leads with integrity, how he champions quality journalism even when it's financially inconvenient, how fiercely he protects his employees." She paused, allowing genuine vulnerability to color her tone. "When Nathan abandoned me in that church, Marcus not only saved me from public humiliation, he offered me something I didn't know I needed. Brutal honesty at a time when everyone around me was lying. The silence that followed was absolute. The kind of silence that even cameramen stopped adjusting to." Clara felt Marcus's hand find hers under the table, squeezing gently. "And what about the accusations that this was orchestrated to protect financial assets?" Another voice shouted from the back of the room. Richard responded this time, displaying legal documents on the screen. "These are Mrs. Hawthorne's complete financial records, which she voluntarily made available. As you can see, there were no transfers of assets before or after the marriage. Furthermore, Mr. Hawthorne insisted on a retroactive prenuptial agreement that guarantees she will retain all her assets independently. Hardly anyone trying to steal an inheritance would be acting on her behalf." The questioning continued for another 40 minutes, each more aggressive than the last. But as the evidence piled up, Clara saw the narrative shift in real time. Reporters who had arrived prepared to crucify them were now asking questions about when Nathan would be formally charged, how Monica was responding to the allegations, and about legal protections for other potential victims of similar romance scams. When they finally stood up to leave, Clara felt her legs trembling with adrenaline and relief. Marcus guided her through the corridors to his private office, closing the door behind them and creating a bubble of blessed silence away from the media circus. "You were amazing," he said, turning to face her. There was pure pride in his eyes, but also something deeper, more vulnerable. The way you turned her question around, showing strength without seeming defensive, it was perfect. Clara leaned against her desk, the emotional exhaustion finally catching up with her. "I just told the truth, or at least most of it." She looked at him, really looked, past the expensive suit and the unwavering confidence in the man who had interrupted her life and simultaneously saved her. "Marcus, what do we do now? Nathan will be prosecuted. The story will eventually lose its appeal. And then what?" He closed the distance between them slowly, giving her time to step back if she wanted. When he reached her, his hands found her waist, gently pulling her against him. "And then we live," he said simply. "We stop pretending this is temporary or transactional. We stop hiding behind corporate strategies and business arrangements." His forehead touched hers and Clara closed her eyes, allowing herself to absorb his closeness. "Clara, I don't want a 6-month marriage followed by a discreet divorce. I want this, you, real and complicated and scary." Clara's heart raced, fear and hope waging war in her chest. What if we find out it doesn't work? That the intensity of these circumstances has created something artificial? "Then at least we'll know we tried," Marcus echoed his own words from the previous night. "But Clara, what I feel isn't artificial. It's the most real thing in my life. And I've built empires from scratch. I know solid foundations when I see them." She opened her eyes, finding warm amber gazing back with an intensity that completely unsettled her. "You scare me," she admitted in a whisper. "The depth of what you seem to feel, the certainty when I'm still trying to process it all. It's overwhelming." "I know." His thumbs traced circles on her hips, an unconscious gesture of comfort. And I'm not asking you to reciprocate immediately. I'm just asking you to stay, to give me a real chance to prove that this isn't manipulation or convenience, but something genuine worth risking everything for. Clara considered all the reasons why she should back away, protect her heart, maintain professional distance. She thought of Nathan and the betrayal that still burned like embers. But then she thought of the way Marcus held her as if she were precious, the way he defended his work, how he had never tried to change or diminish who she was. And she realized that the fear wasn't that it might be fake, but that it might be devastatingly real. "Okay," she heard herself say, the words slipping out before her analytical mind could censor them. "We'll try. Really, with no expiration date or pre-planned exit clauses. But Marcus, you need to be patient with me. I need to rebuild the ability to trust, and that doesn't happen overnight." The smile that lit up his face transformed his austere beauty into something almost devastating. "I would wait a lifetime for you. Clara Hawthorne. A few months of patience seems like a small price to pay." He kissed her then, and it was different from the previous kisses. It wasn't urgent or questioning, but promising. A vow sealed with shared lips and breath. Clara wrapped her arms around his neck, finally allowing herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, good things could come from disasters. Their moment was interrupted by a soft knock on the door, and Chen entered carrying a tray with lunch. She glanced between the two of them, a knowing smile curving her lips. "I thought they might need to eat," she said, placing the tray on the coffee table. "And Mrs. Hawthorne, your parents are in the lobby. They said they need to speak with you urgently." Reality hit Clara hard, reminding her that there were still relationships to repair and explanations to give. She looked at Marcus, and he nodded in understanding. "Go. I'll finish up some work here and meet you at home later." He kissed her forehead gently. "And Clara, your parents love you. They'll understand." Descending into the lobby, Clara saw her parents waiting, her mother's face etched with worry and her father with that protective expression he wore when he felt powerless. When they saw her, they both stood up simultaneously, and Clara felt tears burning her eyes. "Mom, Dad," she began, but her mother pulled her into a tight hug before she could continue. "We saw the press conference," her mother whispered against her hair. "We saw the evidence against Nathan. Honey, I'm so sorry. We should have seen it. We should have understood." "No one saw," Clara replied, holding her parents tighter. "He was good at lying." Her father stepped back first, holding her shoulders as he studied her with fatherly eyes that saw more than most. "And Marcus Hawthorne? Is this real, Clara? Or is this another situation where you're protecting yourself?" The question was fair, and Clara considered it carefully before answering. It started as protection, as a convenient solution for both of us. But it became something more, something I'm still discovering. He's not perfect. He's controlling and sometimes frighteningly intense. But he sees me, really sees me, in a way that Nathan never has. Her mother exchanged a glance with her father, that silent communication of couples who had spent decades together. Then she smiled, and there was acceptance in that smile, even mixed with lingering worry. "Then we will support him. But Clara, if he hurts you, your father and I have a very serious talk prepared for Mr. Hawthorne." The maternal threat elicited a laugh from Clara, the first genuine one in days. They had lunch together at the restaurant near the building, and gradually the tension in their conversations dissipated. Her parents shared embarrassing stories of their own hasty marriage, decided upon after only 3 months of dating against everyone's advice. 32 years later, they were proof that convention didn't always dictate happiness. When Clara finally returned to the townhouse that night, she found Marcus in the kitchen, a surprising display of domestic masculinity as he attempted to prepare something involving pasta and sauce. "What are you doing?" she asked, unable to suppress a smile at the sight of flour on his shirt. "Trying to cook dinner," he admitted. looking at the ingredients as if they were complex business equations. Chen has the night off, and I thought I could manage basic noodles. Apparently, I was wrong. Clara laughed, a light, free sound that surprised them both. She crossed the kitchen, taking the wooden spoon from her hand. "Let me help before you set your own house on fire." They cooked together, an awkward dance of bodies learning to share space, but also full of laughter when Marcus confused salt with sugar, and Clara almost burned the garlic. It was ordinary and messy, and absolutely perfect in its imperfection. During the impromptu dinner, eaten at the kitchen island instead of the formal dining room, Clara felt something settle in her chest. This was real, not a performance for cameras or a show for critical audiences. It was just two imperfect people trying to figure out how to build something together. "Thank you," she said suddenly, and Marcus looked up, confusion clearly visible in his eyes. "Why burn the garlic?" "For everything. For showing up at that church, for protecting me from Nathan, for being patient while I process this." She reached across the island, and he immediately took it. "And for making terrible pasta but trying anyway." Marcus smiled, that genuine smile that transformed his whole face. "I'm not perfect, Clara. I'll mess things up, be overprotective, probably make decisions you'll hate because I think I know better. But I'll try, every day, to be."